Laura, go on.
Well, good morning.
Oh, good evening.
Yeah, that's right. I always get that
Good
wrong,
morning.
don't I? Well, good. I'm glad we got it all worked out and
Yes.
no worries. Unfortunately, those bank things can take a while. So I just
Yes,
wanted to double
really sorry
check
about
because
that.
yeah, well, I would be worried on your end. You feel like you've transferred all of this money and it like where is it? How does it take so long?
So
So
we had a festive week last week in India. That's why banks last minute decided to close down.
yes, no, I understand that. That throws off everything. And
Yeah.
actually, it was funny because we had another client mail us a check, and he was concerned it got lost in the mail because it took so long to get here.
Yeah.
And he was like, I don't know if I cancel it, if someone got a hold of it. And like, of course, just when he was going to cancel it, it arrived.
We
So
were
like
also
it took,
reassuring that if we sent it to the wrong bank account or what, we were
yeah.
just sure, but yeah,
Yes, no, that's the other concern. So let me go ahead and share my screen
so
and we'll
I
get
was
go.
also, I'm really sorry about not being able to send the notes that I was supposed to because of the same reason.
Oh,
Very festive.
yeah,
But
sure. Well, I think what'll be good is this'll, I think get us at a really good space in terms of the content of the background and the instruction side. So next week we'll focus on your notes and get because I think the visual hammers are really a critical part of it, especially when you're thinking about maybe some other name options or just the whole
yes,
project in general for yourself. So I really wanted to get to this part, but it's fundamental to think about strategy that you really the core positioning idea is most important, and then how these other things like category and visual hammer work with that, and to
uh,
lock everything together is really critical. So
uh,
this will be really fun today. I hope you
excited.
enjoy it.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so if you have any critical questions, during it, let me know. But I'll try to keep it going at a pretty good pace, just so at the end we have anything. But I think this will get you thinking. Make sure you take a lot of notes in terms of well, you can have the recording or the slides after, but about things that might pop into your head about your brand or thinking of different ideas.
Yeah,
So
I actually rewatched the first session and I made a lot of notes on them.
good. Yeah, no, actually that's a great idea. Kind of to be present in the moment to listen while I'm speaking live, and then you can take the notes
Absolutely.
later.
I agree.
Yeah, that's a really good plan. So again, the core idea of positioning, and this is really kind of fundamental, is that it's the opposite of communications, and that really was what people believed that marketing and particularly advertising was all about, just kind of communicating who you are. And that you took the communication as the company, designed their marketing message and just threw it out there, and the consumer would just suck it up like a sponge.
Mm.
Well, that's a lovely idea, but as time and things got more complicated, it just wasn't very effective because people weren't sucking it up. They couldn't, there were too many messages out there. So that's where positioning said, okay, so if people aren't just willing to take up anything, we have to flip it. And we have to first look inside the consumer's mind. And you start with the mind and say, where is there an opportunity? What we call, where is there an open hole? And that's the position. That's what you want to own. So you have to think first of, where is there an open hole, or how can we define it? If it's a new category, for example, so that people will take that information in. And therefore, you structure your message in order to fill that open hole in the mind. And that's the whole idea. So how do you get into the mind? Again, we talked about sharpening that knife, and that's a lot of, how we help clients work. And that's the idea. You sharpen the knife to own one idea, simplification of the idea, very important and critical. And that the best way into the mind is then with that single word or concept. And again, a lot of examples of words that have gotten into the mind and brands that have gotten into the mind because of these ideas, concepts, and words, like disappearing photos and Snapchat, expensive coffee and Starbucks, search and Google, energy drink and Red Bull. So the concept of owning a word in the mind, and these brands filling those open holes. Now, the big idea and what we're going to talk about today is that words alone aren't enough. It actually isn't enough to just find a word. The really big opportunity is finding a visual. So finding a visual is really equally as important. It's so important that sometimes you even have to change the words in order that your idea or brand can be visualized. So disappearing photos. Now, these ideas are similar, right? You have words and a photo that are communicating the same thing but how are the visuals different? And the way they communicate, they're actually different. So it's the same idea, but the visual communicates it in a very different way. And to understand that difference, we have to look inside the mind. So you have one mind, but you actually have two different brains. So in that side, there's two brains. There's a right brain and a left brain. Now, left brain is how we talked briefly about this probably last time, but it's how you get in sound, and right is visually. So when you're hearing me, it's going to your left brain. When you're seeing my slides, it's going right into your right brain. And they're connected by this little corpus callosum. A spoken word, as I said, understood immediately by the left. The visual understood instantly by the right. Now, what's really interesting is that the printed word has to take a much longer route in terms of the brain time, because you perceive it first by your right brain. You look at it, right? You have to then read it to yourself over to the left brain. And that's why, children, when they're learning to read, they read out loud because they're actually reading to their own brain. And that actually takes time and effort. It's less than a second, but that extra time means it's much more difficult to actually use words to quickly communicate something compared to hearing it or seeing it.
Right. Yes.
The other big idea, and this is really important, is that the right brain has another important function, and in that is the side of your emotions. So you see that when you communicate something with a visual, it's much more emotional. The photo of a baby versus the word baby, while they might communicate the same thing, words are not emotional the way a visual is. And that's why a marketing campaign with a powerful visual image is much more effective than words alone. So even if it's the same idea, if we can find a way to visually show it, it's going to be much more memorable and much more emotional. And that's the critical element of combining a visual with your brand. And you think about other examples when a stoplight changes, for example, to green, to yellow, to red, you hit the brakes without even thinking. You don't need to think because it's so instantaneous. And the great example is, what if we used words to communicate the same thing, but I think it would not be as effective. There will be way more accidents, right? Because people just don't react as quickly to words as they do to the colors. And that's where the book came on the visual hammer. So it really works in conjunction with the book Positioning, because positioning is all about owning a word. And here, visual hammer is about how driving that word into the mind with a visual is the best thing and the ultimate objective in marketing, to own a word in the mind, and then to do that by driving it in with a visual hammer, to drive that idea into the mind. And we showed the big three examples, if you will, of Coca-Cola, how Marlboro and Corona drove their brands into the mind with a visual, like the Coca-Cola bottle, or the Marlboro cowboy, or the Corona with the lime.
Mhm.
So quickly, just to review that the trademark isn't a visual. A lot of companies spend a lot of time making their trademark and their fonts very beautiful. And that's all fine and dandy, but it doesn't communicate anything the way a visual hammer does. And so while all brands have a trademark, very few have what we call a visual hammer. And it's
Mm.
not just a visual that's attractive, it also communicates something. Again, the contour bottle is a visual hammer because it communicates the idea, the real thing. It hammers the words, the original, the authentic cola into the mind of the consumer. And now, again, once you have a brand that has a visual like the contour bottle, it's very effective to use it across everything. And Coca-Cola is a fantastic example of doing that across cans and cups and advertising and trucks, everything. They stick the Coca-Cola bottle on. Now, let me go into a little bit more detail about the Marlboro story, because I think it really shows the power, not just of visuals, but a single visual used over and over again and how you find it. So Marlboro cigarettes, before they were launched, it was just a new brand on the market. And
Mhm.
at that time, there were four dominant cigarette brands. There was Winston, Camel, Lucky Strike, and Chesterfields. And at that time, mostly men smoked, and the big opportunity was actually to expand the brand and to expand the category to women. And all the advertising of that time showed these brands trying to expand to appeal to women. Just one more, they all showed men and women in their advertising. And, you could say that made sense in the market to try to expand as these brands were dominant in their category. But it didn't make sense in the mind. For Marlboro to do the same thing to appeal to men and women would not make sense in the mind. It was not an open hole, if you will. To get into the mind, you needed a narrow approach. So, Marlboro did do that. They decided to focus on men and they worked with an advertising agency. And like many great ideas, you can think, well, terrific. If we'll focus on men, and not only that, we're going to have, a really diverse campaign, and we're going to show lots of different men, different, very manly men, if you will, that cowboy, perhaps, the construction worker, a fisherman, and a lumberman. And then these are great. I mean, most companies, are always striving for diversity. And that made sense in the marketplace that it appeals to all types of men. But is that memorable? Is that going to drive the idea into the mind? In the mind, four visuals are confusing.
Yeah.
Yet that's the type of strategy that most companies use. What happened in the case of Marlboro is pretty interesting. They ran that first ad. And unfortunately for them, it got such a good reception that they decided to get rid of the rest of the campaign and just repeat the cowboy, not just for years, but for decades. And that decision was critical to this becoming a visual hammer. Had they used the wide range of men, I don't think any of them would have become as powerful as that one visual, that cowboy imagery of the Marlboro visual hammer. And it for sure made Marlboro, and a big part of what made Marlboro the number one global cigarette brand across the world. Again, there are many Mexican beers for sale on the American market. It's hard to stick out among them, but only one became the leader, and that, of course, was Corona. Again, how did they do it? Well, they put that lime in the top. And just a reminder, that lime is the visual hammer. It says it's the authentic Mexican beer. And again, what's so great is the globalization of brands, that even, Mexico, not really known for beer, but Mexican food is so popular and drinking beer with it so popular that Corona has really become a major worldwide success, one of the top 100 global brands in the world. Again, what's interesting is how Heineken reacted to that. Heineken was a global powerhouse, and it was for many years the leading imported brand in America. They said, "Oh my gosh, visuals are hot. We need a visual hammer." And so they saw that they had a little star forever on their can that and package that nobody noticed. So they enlarged it. They made that star more prominent on the cans and their advertising. But that's not a visual hammer. I mean, think about, what does that communicate? It's a visual, but it's not a visual hammer because it doesn't communicate anything. And if anything, the only thing that communicates is a symbol of the Soviet Union, not a beer, and certainly not something for them to want to promote in connection with their brand. Just to have one more note on this is that cities and countries can have visual hammers too. It is in fact a big part of tourism and promotion of countries for business and other things that they use a visual hammer. Many times there's lots of visual interesting things in a city, but if you can focus on one to identify and be that landmark and visual hammer, you can think of the Statue of Liberty for New York City, the Taj Mahal, of course, for India, the Eiffel Tower for Paris, the Red Square for Moscow, the Great Wall for China, the Opera House in Sydney. I mean, they didn't have anything historic in Sydney, so they built this extravagant kind of weird looking opera house, and that has definitely become the visual hammer for Sydney. The Colosseum of Rome, Big Ben in London, Christ the Redeemer in Rio de Janeiro, the gondolas in Venice, the Acropolis in Athens, the pyramids in Egypt. I have a speech there in a couple of months. I'm very excited. I've never seen the pyramids. So, when we go to a lot of countries and, they want to increase tourism and the visibility of their country, we tell them you need a visual hammer. Yeah. What about your country can be symbolic for it, and link into that in the mind. Yet most companies are focused on words. I mean, words are the dominant way we communicate. And we live in a world of words. Our meetings are words, text messages are words, speeches, books, marketing plans. Yet the best way we found into the mind, not with words at all, it's with visuals. And that's why we're spending our time today talking about the importance of visuals and how to find a visual for brand. Now, what's really important is, this example here, visuals always dominate words, even if they, fight each other. Which do you believe, the words or the visual? I see a pretty woman. Instantly, the brain believes the visual and discounts the words, say, oh my goodness, they use the wrong words. Nobody ever says they use the wrong picture. Yeah. Nobody ever says that. So words are believable. I mean, pictures are believable in a way words can never be. Right. And so if you can visualize it, it's instantly believable. People believe the photo. Yeah. So it's fantastic. And again, many visual opportunities are missed. There's no doubt that Tesla has become, a powerful brand by dominating electric vehicles. But, maybe they could have used more of an electrified visual within their brand in some way. That is a missed opportunity to make a visual hammer, finding what you are and finding a way to visualize it. The easiest way to create a visual hammer is when you name your brand. If you pick a name like Apple, well, there you go. There's the visual hammer. And they made the little bite out of it to make it interesting. But again, or how about an oil company? You call it Shell. Well, there you go. Visual hammer is the shell. Pretty simple. And again, on their gasoline stations, they don't even use the words. They just make that visual as big as possible because it instantly communicates the name of the brand. And that's a terrific strategy.
One question. So, isn't that the same scenario as Henniken's though? Because they put a star, right? On their
the which store?
The beer example that you showed me, the brand with stars. Heineken. So isn't that the same situation here with Apple and Shell? Because what are they communicating?
Oh, well, no. So the Heineken star doesn't. I mean, Apple it communicates the name. So it doesn't actually add something, but it's just a simplification. If Heineken, meant star, but it doesn't. So but that's a good question. It's not, you're right. It isn't is additive as something that communicates something specific, like the Coca-Cola bottle. But in the most simple way, for a gas station, for example, you also have to think about your competition. So your competition of, most other gas stations have no visual. So just even a simple name that lends itself to a visual can be really impactful and having it stand out. So here we go. So we've got 10 ways from the book to find a visual hammer. And so there's not one way to do it. And that's what's always interesting about marketing. There's lots of different ways. And, there's, lots of, examples depending on the category of how things are done. And some categories, have more competition than others. And some are, products versus services, direct to consumer versus business to business. But always the name matters, the position, the category, and the visual hammer. So that's what we're going to talk about today, 10 ways to find it. So these are 10 things to sort of think about. And this is really how we think about it when working with a client of, what can we use here? What are, you almost like the cards on the table. What kind of cards are we dealt with? And what can we find to make it work? So again, shape can be a very interesting one. And another brand that, just used the shape of its name. The name is Target. So they made a target. What's funny about this is, obviously it's the simplicity of all the name does is represent what, all the visual does is represent what the name, but there's so many there's so many missed opportunities of companies that have names like Target that don't even use that visual. And that's somewhat the point, that if you give yourself a name like JetBlue, you better be using blue seats and blue websites and blue everything, because that's baked right in there into your name and makes it, much more easy to visualize. Yeah. And again, they simplified that target, and so that it's very visible across their stores. But not only that, they've put it on everything from their shopping bags, their advertising, and we say just about everything. They've got a cute dog in their ads that they put the target on. So you can, when you think about a simple visual, and here, you've got a mass, merchandising type of brand of ways to make it fun and creative. Now it competes with another company you might have heard of. You think you know the name of this visual?
Walmart.
It is Walmart. And so it's become, somewhat, identifiable, but not very memorable and certainly not very meaningful. It's just, I don't know, an asterisk. Target last year at 4.7 net profits, Walmart 2.3 net profits. Of course, Walmart is focused on low prices, so something that represented that would be helpful, although it's hard to find a visual hammer. It sounds easy, but it's pretty difficult. Other visual shape hammers, for example, Salesforce had the cloud. What was their focus? No software. Everything was in the cloud. So, of course, that's a very powerful visual hammer. Talked about Snapchat and the disappearing, or TikTok. Initially started with those short music videos you lip sync to. So the little music symbol was a very nice visual hammer. Now, again, you can't just add a star, or Deloitte Consulting added a dot to their name and they make it a big thing in their advertising. That's not a visual hammer. The dot doesn't communicate anything. Yeah. It's a visual, device, but it's not a visual hammer because it doesn't say anything. Yeah. Number 2 is color. The use of a single color, we've always said, is a very effective strategy in branding. And in some cases, that single color can be so powerful, it becomes, in a sense, the visual hammer itself. For example, the golden arches of McDonald's, they even have a name for it, right? The golden arches. And that's, of course, the visual hammer of McDonald's. Very, very visible in retail, become the world's largest restaurant, $19 billion last year, net profit of 24%. It's a lot of fries. Again, I said the good naming strategy, if you're going to name an airline, well, JetBlue, you put a color in that airline and it does help, become identifiable in a very crowded space with a lot of very well-known brands. A name with a color is distinctive and it stood out. So in their case, a very good idea, a successful startup airline. Tiffany's, they've actually have a Pantone color for this distinctive color for their box, and it's become a trademark visual hammer for its brand.
Yeah, when you think of the brand Tiffany, that color immediately pops into your mind. Like that
It does.
that color
Yeah.
stands for this brand. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's an emotional, even though it's just a color and it's just a box, there's still such an emotional reaction to that versus, just the trademark, which is, visually striking and definitely identifiable.
Right.
But, even that color, like you said, it brings that kind of warm feeling into your mind. Red Hat in the B2B section, again, they're an open source software and consulting, but they picked a name that lent itself to a visual hammer. Doesn't necessarily communicate much about their business, but it's so distinctive in that market where nobody has a name that can be visualized. In terms of annual revenue, they went from 91 million in 2002 to 3.4 billion in 2018. Amazing, 37 times revenue. Of course, it was bought recently by IBM for $34 billion. And they really wanted that brand. Of course, the technology and the pioneering industry that they were in, but that brand is so strong in the mind. And there's no doubt that visual helped drive in that idea. Christian Louboutin, you might not have heard of him, but he is a luxury designer of women's shoes. You might be saying it's hard to, all the shoes kind of look the same, but he was very much into stiletto high heels. But what made him different wasn't the shoe, but the bottom of the shoe. He made the bottoms red. Why did he do that? So you can identify the shoes that were his. And that became a very effective PR vehicle and visual hammer for the brand. The red show sold shoes. Sex in the City was a big promoter of the brand, really, kicked off from that. Now there's 4 major golf championships in the world: the PGA, the US Open, the British Open, and the Masters. And that's at the Augusta National Golf Club, actually not too far from Atlanta. It's also the only one hosted by a private golf club. It's become enormously famous. Why did they receive such a prestigious designation? Well, it's kind of silly. It's kind of simple, but they give the winner a green jacket. I mean, green jackets they're kind of ugly, but it was so distinctive and makes such a powerful press and visual hammer. Here's Patrick Reed giving Tiger Woods one in 2019. They all get trophies, and all the trophies you are out there, but they're not memorable the way that green jacket was and is for the Masters tournament and continues to be. So one color is better than many. Nothing illustrates this better than the Apple original logo. You could say is much more attractive with the rainbow colors. And of course, they were dedicated to the home computer market, right? And also, with children, school children. And so the Apple, I think, was a good choice in terms of the name. And that rainbow is very attractive, but the more memorable single white color that they use now of the Apple is much more memorable. And again, they've also extended that into white being their color and the white earbuds of the iPod. Big part of the advertising and the brand in general. I mean, all cables were black. You didn't want everyone to see, the cable, if you will. So it was supposed to disappear, but Apple did the opposite. People wanted to show off that they were cool and they had an iPod or now an iPhone, right? One other point to mention is flags can be visual hammers for a country. Most are attractive, but they're not very memorable. I mean, not everybody recognizes most of these flags. They look so similar, but that's Germany, that's France, Spain, Holland, Belgium, and Italy. Most people get a few, but it's pretty complicated. Not are very memorable if you think of Germany's flag without seeing it. It's pretty hard. However, there's a few that stand out and a few that people remember. And that's mainly because they have single colors. So the flag of Japan, the rising sun, Israel, right, with the star and the blue, and of course, China with the red. Those are much, much more memorable. So that's the difference. Are you going to make your brand and your visual attractive like those flags, or are you going to make it memorable like these single color flags? Now, sometimes there's an opportunity for the product itself to have a visual built into it. You think about the watch band of a Rolex watch. It was the first expensive watch on the market, but it was that unique watch band that let people know that you were wearing a Rolex. It was very identifiable. Now, you might say, but wait a minute, everybody copied Rolex. And in this day and age, it's easy to copy the competition. Sure, it is. But as long as your brand gets in the mind first, all these others look like, imitation. They're not the real thing. Everyone knows that the real watch band belongs to Rolex. It didn't matter that everybody copied them. Rolex, like I said, was first in the mind. And all these other brands are thought of as imitation, right? They're cheap imitations of the real thing, Rolex. Go back in history, even something called lifesavers candy in the shape of a lifesaver. It actually had a meaning or a use. So you didn't choke on it. That little hole allowed children would swallow them. And so the hole was meant there to save your life, actually. So you didn't choke, would let the air through. So interesting backstory on that one. But of course, a powerful hammer. And again, good idea to use it as the brand name itself. You probably don't see a lot of these in India, but if you go to cold parts of the world, everybody has to have a Canadian Goose jacket. And this has become a very, very powerful brand. Sales of 400 million on this thing. It's an expensive jacket. It's about a $400 jacket. But the look of the jacket, and of course, coming from Canada, the Canada Goose, again, using an animal, nice in the name itself. This is another brand, the Geox athletic shoe. They're from Italy. Now, they have a lot of technology built into it. And they could say and talk about how, they're more healthy for your feet and they're more comfortable. But what they did was have a powerful visual to illustrate that. And they say it's the shoe that breathes. The difference for them is these micro holes on the bottom that allows air to come out and the breathability of the shoe to increase. And they dramatize it in the fact of the shoe that breathes. I mean, a fantastic illustration of taking a technological advantage and finding a way to illustrate it. Again, sometimes it's not the product, but it's the package that you put it in that can make it stand out. Here's pomegranate juice. This is the first brand in the market or in the mind in America, Palm Wonderful. And they used this pomegranate juice in an interesting bottle. And so pomegranate juice has gotten a lot of publicity as being a super fruit, a superpower. They've gotten great publicity. And then again, they reinforce this. The bottle is the star of the ads and the marketing, and they put a cape on it, the antioxidant superpower. So again, connecting the idea with the package and then finding a way to visualize it, not just saying it, but visualizing it is what makes it really more memorable. They've had a lot of sales on something that is kind of a relatively niche market, but 200 million a year. Now, Stella Artois is just one of hundreds of beers from Belgium. It was imported into America back in 2000. Most other brands, were there a long time. But how has it become so successful? Today, it's the 5th largest selling imported beer brand in America. Is Stella better? I don't know. It's a beer. There's a lot of good Belgian beers, as a matter of fact. But what is different about Stella is its visual hammer. So they don't advertise drinking it in a glass. They say it's a chalice. It's a chalice. It's a special type of glass, one that, we were not familiar with here in America. So the use of this glass and the promotion, the advertising and giving it away to restaurants so they'll use and sell it in this glass was a big part of the strategy and driving the idea into the mind that, this was a classy beer. What does it say that you sell it in a chalice? It must be better. You've got the dripping wax seal of the Maker's Mark bottle, the fourth largest selling whiskey in America. It's different, right? It's a challenge, if you're, a smaller brand to stand out from, a leader like Jack Daniels. But the fact that it's homemade with that, the Maker's Mark, a candle dripping on the top. Global leader in sparkling water, Perrier, has a very distinctive bottle. Their visual hammer is that bottle. And they put that symbol now on the can. Again, most drinks are consumed in cans. You might be familiar with Orangina if you've been to France, the largest selling carbonated drink in France, a very unique and distinguishable bottle that kind of looks like an orange. Another long time looking back in history was the launch of the Hanes pantyhose brand. Most of people don't even wear pantyhose, but it's a good example of using a launch strategy to find a visual hammer. And so today they're all sold in the same kind of packaging at supermarkets and all types of stores. They could have called it, and what they wanted to do is go into supermarkets. So a new distribution channel to take the same product and go into a new market. They could have, used the same brand, but they launched a second brand for that second channel. And not just that, they gave it a name that locked it into that channel, and they called it legs. So you've got legs and eggs. So they put it in little egg containers to sell it in the supermarket. And it became the largest selling brand. It turned out to be even a better place to sell pantyhose because people, go there much, much more commonly or more often than the department stores. It's what we call a homonym. We've got eggs and legs, and you put it together, legs, words that sound alike but have different meanings, and combining those together not only gave them the brand name, but that very distinctive packaging. Now today they've done away with that expensive packaging because it wasn't no longer necessary once you've built that brand into the mind. But it can be effective sometimes to think about what kind of packaging to launch something can we think about. Number 5 is action. Sometimes there's an action oriented to a brand that can become the visual hammer. Tropicana is our number 1 orange juice, big brand around the world. The visual hammer, the straw and the orange. See, Tropicana's difference was it's not from concentrate. So they're trying to communicate that. Now, the thing is, it's not a very good way to drink orange juice if you stick an orange, but it communicates the idea that it was the not from concentrate brands, unlike the other brands that were. Another look back in history, the first bar soap brand on the market was Ivory. It was a big winner, launched by Procter & Gamble in 1879. It was the leading brand for 78 years. It floated, if you remember the history of the brand. So in the bathtub, it wouldn't sink to the bottom, it floated. But it was first. It was first in the market, first in the mind. Very, very powerful brand. How do you compete against it? You narrow the focus. That's what Dove did. They narrowed the focus. To what? Well, to something that had a visual hammer, as a matter of fact. It was the difference in Dove was it was a quarter moisturizing lotion. You see, it was a moisturizing soap. Most soap was too drying to the skin. Women wanted soft skin. So Dove said, no problem. We are going to add moisturizer to the soap. And not only did they say that, but they visualized it. They said, here's 3/4 of a bar. And then we're going to take the cream and pour it in. Now, that's not how you make it, but that is a great way to visualize how we have a whole quarter of your bar soap is actually moisturizing. And today, moisturizing has become a bigger, idea in terms of the soap category. Today, Dove is the number one bar soap brand with 24% market share and become, a big, powerful global brand. Another interesting action-oriented thing was with a nonprofit. We called it the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. Everyone remembers this from the days of, right? Even you, yeah, from Facebook. And so they needed a way to promote ALS and how to fight and raise money against this really horrific disease. And, being first to do this, it went crazy viral of, every celebrity and person doing it around the world and challenging people. And really the results were amazing because not only were people, doing it, they actually really did give money to ALS. In 2013, 2.2 euros, 2014, 65 million euros. Amazing result. Now, hard to sustain something like that that's kind of a viral one-off for the brand, but it shows the power of something as simple as that action to really drive up enthusiasm. Dr. Best is a German toothbrush, 5% market share back in 1988. Today, they're a big dominant brand, 40% market share. And how did they do it? Well, they had a great way to visualize the difference. Now, the difference of the product was the head was flexible. So it was flexible head. Well, how was that better? Well, they had a way to demonstrate it. It was easier on your gums, right? It didn't rough up your gums. But, it's hard to show that. So they did it with a tomato. And they said, here's a normal toothbrush. If you press hard and brush your teeth, you'll pierce the tomato and make a mess. But of course, with Dr. Best flexible toothbrush, you press hard, it will not hurt the tomato. And so there's the analogy to your gums. It's going to be good on your gums and the best toothbrush. Again, a great example of visualizing your difference. So they had a great difference, but they found a way to visualize it. Founders are terrific. People love the founder's story of a brand. And of course, we talked about the importance of PR and the founder is going to be the spokesperson, of course, for the brand. And so you look back in history and see many great brands have that founder as an integral part, even the visual hammer for the brand. In 1981, IBM introduced the first 16-bit office personal computer, really the most revolutionary product of the last century, done by one of the major companies, IBM. It was 3 years later that somebody else came into the market. This guy, Michael Dell, introduced another brand of personal computers from his dorm room at the University of Texas at age 19. And you think, how could a 19-year-old from the University of Texas, not exactly our best technical college, do this? Well, we talked the last time about how he narrowed the focus, right, into computers direct, but he was also the visual hammer and spokesperson for the brand. And great publicity, Michael Dell here is including a book he wrote of how Dell revolutionized the market. And 17 years later, in 2001, Dell was the global leader in personal computers with not only that narrow focus, but Michael Dell himself as the powerful spokesperson for the brand. Compaq was the number 2 brand. Again, a good name because it was focused on laptop computers. And then there was HP. That was the printer brand, very strong in printers, expanding into the computer market. They were stuck down at number 3. It's interesting to note back in 2021, that Hewlett-Packard merged with Compaq. They realized they needed a better brand. Unfortunately, they picked the wrong name. They changed it to Hewlett-Packard. Compaq probably would have been a better name. Even interesting, we talked about, what Dell did of expanding the brand into too many things, much like IBM. It went down terribly. Today, 20 years later, who's the leader? It's Lenovo, a Chinese company, has become the leader. HP, the number 2 brand, and Dell all the way down there in number 3. They didn't maintain their focus, which is a major mistake. And of course, what happened to IBM? We talked about their unfocusing. In 24 years, they lost 15 billion on personal computer. Because what's IBM in the mind? It's a mainframe computer. All they needed was, again, a second name for their personal computer, a big, big missed opportunity. They finally sold the business to Lenovo for 1.75. And Lenovo, it's a second name, has allowed it actually to become more powerful apart from IBM, even though it's not a great name and owned by the Chinese, a powerful brand around the world. Another founder who became famous, he's no longer with us, but shows you how founders can, way outlive their time on earth, actually, for the brand itself. I think everybody recognizes this guy here. He's Colonel Sanders, the original founder of Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's become the largest chicken chain around the world, even the number one fast food chain in China. They've got 5,872 units in China. You can see how the visual hammer needs no translation. It's one of the really powerful impacts of using visuals as you go global, because you don't need to translate them. Now, originally the name was Kentucky Fried Chicken with Colonel Sanders, and they got worried about the use of the word fried. And so they changed it to KFC, thinking that people were going to forget about that it was a fried brand. Total disaster. I mean, you see KFC and you think Kentucky Fried Chicken. The better approach, if they truly wanted to take the fried out of the name, would be to rename it with a name connecting to the visual hammer, like Colonel Sanders Chicken would have been a better direction, because they never can get away from fried. And today people are all into fried, as a matter of fact. Crispy chicken is the hottest thing, but sadly, KFC has not really ridden the trend as strongly as they could because of the weakness of the initial type names. Those in the long term, aren't as strong as the written out names. Number 7 is symbol. Sometimes there's a symbol you can associate with your brand. Another example to look back, in 1892, U.S. Rubber introduced a new kind of shoe that had rubber soles and canvas tops. And there were a lot of brands that they launched, actually. It wasn't until 1916 that they consolidated them all and picked one name. And they called them Keds. Actually, they wanted to call them Peds, which would have been more, with being the Latin for feet, Peds, but they couldn't get the trademark. So they called them Keds. And they were known as sneakers. You know why they called them sneakers? I didn't even know this, actually, until I did the research about this brand, because they were quiet. All other shoes made sound when you walked. They were quiet. You could sneak around. That's why we call them sneakers. Crazy. But this is what people thought of as sneakers. Keds owned the idea of sneakers in the mind. And for many years, they were the dominant brand. Until 1973, a major change happened, a revolution, if you will, in terms of what the bottom of the shoe looked like, because a brand named Nike introduced something called the waffle sole. Right. If you know the story, using a waffle maker, he made the rubber to make it better for running. And so it created a new category. Nike wasn't a sneaker, it was an athletic shoe, right? They elevated to a new category with a new symbol, the Nike swoosh. There's nothing about the swoosh that says anything, but it is a powerful visual hammer. It's what we call a free hammer. You see, when your brand is first in a new category, particularly a new, exciting category, especially one that spends a lot of money on advertising, you can really build a strong, almost any visual, you can build a strong visual hammer. And that's the example like Nike. It's pretty rare that a company has an opportunity like a Nike, right? That has so much advertising money and excitement, but it does show you the power of doing this. But to note that, not everybody has the opportunity, but a few do. Like Amazon has the arrow that has become identifiable with, getting your stuff and a happy face, the Amazon arrow. Again, one of the most revolutionary brands and category of this century. Or you have the visual hammer for Mercedes-Benz, that TriStar that's enormous, and people love it to be enormous, as a matter of fact, on their cars. What's good to remember here is that simpler is better. The original symbol was way more complicated and not as effective, not as visually, you can't see it at a distance the way the revision of the symbol was. And so that try mark really was a great improvement. And so to think about things as simple as possible, you might think, well, geez, the new one looks so boring, but it really has to cut through a lot of clutter out there. So you can't think about it on its own. You have to think about, in the big world out there. Uber, fantastic, revolution, right, of a brand and a new category. But even Uber, as powerful as they are, and as much PR and stickers and cars out there, they couldn't make this, work as a visual hammer. I mean, nobody knows what that is. Of course, they've gotten smart, and they've gone back to the simple start of just using the words Uber and black. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a great name. It was a black car, and having this as their visual hammer, is that sticker really on the cars, is the most effective strategy. Now, sometimes it's not the founder, but in some cases, you can hire a celebrity to become the visual hammer for your brand. And we've definitely seen many examples of this. For example, Michael Jordan, the basketball star, partnered with Nike to create Air Jordans. And you might, of course, be familiar with this visual hammer of Michael, flying in the air. Today, it dominates basketball shoes, right? So they narrowed the focus to basketball shoes, picked the most famous basketball player ever, who has, been a long-standing, visual hammer spokesperson for this brand. And, kids today that, were, had not been born for decades until after this guy was playing, still know him and still, are very much involved and believe that this brand is the best. So, all right, animal, one of my favorites, using an animal. One of the challenges with celebrities is that, like Tiger Woods was, let's go back to this for 1 minute. Tiger Woods was one of the most very effective, visual hammer for brands like Accenture, for example, be a tiger. And they did very well by using him as, their visual hammer and launching that brand when they spun off from, Arthur Andersen. But as we know, Tiger got in a little bit of trouble and he stopped winning tournaments. He got into, the divorce with his wife and the car accident, and most of his sponsors dropped him like a hot potato. Companies just don't want to be involved with any kind of scandal or negative publicity like that. So there's always a danger with a celebrity. They're kind of an unknown, or even, today with, CEOs getting in trouble, like Bill Gates has had some pretty bad PR of recent. So there's always a risk there. And that risk can be mitigated by using an animal. They tend not to cheat on their wife or do anything bad. And so they can be really terrific visual hammers. And so a duck. Aflac is an insurance company that was going nowhere. It's a tough name, as a matter of fact. So it added a duck to its trademark and to its marketing. And why was the duck effective? Well, the duck was just there to remind you what the name was. And as you think about Aflac kind of sounds like a duck. And so they use this very memorably in their advertising. This isn't a type of insurance that you have to ask for at work. If you get hurt or injured, it will cover some of that extra insurance, and the name itself. It stood out. What other insurance company had a visual hammer? Most of them, don't. And so they went from, and most importantly here, they were trying to drive name recognition. That was the first step in getting people to ask for it at work. And so they went from 12% name recognition without the duck to 94% name recognition with the duck. And, it's an unbelievable result. Not only that, but sales went up to 29% the first year and 28% the second year, 18% the third year. They had a great idea, but first to get through to people, they had to have people ask for it, find out about it, and so that led them into being able to really take advantage of their very successful category. Now, the Mexican burger chain we worked with in Guadalajara, Mexico, Cuarto de Kilo. They sold giant burgers, a fourth of a kilo. But they sold them, they cooked them on this very interesting grill, and that was in their logo and tried to be their visual hammer. But that wasn't as exciting as the big burger. And so we told them we've got to visualize that big burger. And the best way we thought to do it was show someone eating it. How about an animal? Not any animal. How about a lion? That visual hammer of the lion eating the hamburger. And of course, the slogan along with it, a feast for a beast, works in Spanish and English, but it's really the visual that drives that idea. So successful, they're currently moving into the US market. And you see, visuals nicely used with other food chains like Panda Express. Again, you want to sell Chinese food. what better animal than a panda that's very closely associated with the country of China? It's the largest Chinese fast food chain in America with 2,200 restaurants and revenues of $3.9 billion a year. You want to sell clothing? Well, I don't know how many how many whales wear clothing, but Vineyard Vines has used the whale. That's a symbol of Martha's Vineyard, where these two brothers got started first selling ties. It's become the latest hippie brand. But really, that visual hammer has gone a long way in identifying that. Of course, another brand that used a animal before that was the Lacoste alligator, right? But here, very nicely, that Vineyard Vines goes along with the Martha's Vineyard, and a lot of whale sightings and whales are very much associated with that part of the US. Even a glue can add an animal, Gorilla Glue. And again, locking it in with the slogan, the toughest glue on planet Earth. Many people say, hey, we would just, go out there and say your glue is tough. Well, that's fine. But when you say it's Gorilla Glue, that's when you believe that it's tough. The bird in Twitter was a great visualization. Their focus, they narrowed their focus by saying it's 140 character limit. Everybody else, you could write as much as you want, not with Twitter. They narrowed the focus to launch that brand and then use the bird, tweet, 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 tweet. So the micro blog, and that communicated the idea as well with the single color. I got to show a nice Indian example. Wipro, one of the most successful IT companies out of India, they've got a rainbow flower. It's a lovely, pretty rainbow image. But that's not a powerful visual hammer that drives in an idea. We did have some meetings with them and took a look at the brand and thought, we really saw a missed opportunity for them.
Oh, what's consulting Wipro as well?
No, what we did, we've had it was about 10 or so years ago that we had some meetings with them. And so, yeah, but, and here's, but just, as in our books, we take a look at a lot of companies and think, what would we do? What would we do if we got the chance to do it? And for Wipro, and looking at it, we say, my goodness, a flower, what are they? They're IT services and outsourcing. But there was also a very well-known best-selling book called The Bangalore Tiger, how Indian tech startup Wipro is rewriting the rules of global competition. And this was a very, very well-known book talking about, the effectiveness of the Wipro brand. So we saw for Wipro, what better visual than a tiger? The Bangalore Tiger anyway, it connects you with the city Bangalore, which is, the Silicon Valley of India, reinforcing the idea. And tiger for Wipro is a good animal in terms of, think about what it communicates, the nimbleness, agility, the strength, the power, the aggressiveness. People do get scared of tigers, and tigers can eat people, right? So there's, no animal is perfect. But you also have to live with the negatives as well as the many positives when you think about an animal. And so a good brand is maybe like Wipro or Ralph Lauren, but in our opinion, it's a much better brand if you can add a visual to communicate something. Ralph Lauren was an upscale clothing brand, nothing more upscale than playing polo. And visuals are much more effective than words. I mean, you could say clothing polo players wear, but that is not going to be as powerful as just showing a polo player. The last one is heritage. In some cases, being old is good for a brand. In alcohol, for example, brands that have been around hundreds of years are very much respected. And you've got Courvoisier, and they claim as the brandy of Napoleon, right? What Napoleon drank. And they continue to use that and use him as their visual for that brand. Budweiser owned a very powerful visual. It was the first national beer brand in America, and this is how they delivered beer with horses and a beer wagon. And the beer wagon and Clydesdale horses were a powerful visual hammer, seen in many famous Super Bowl ads, as a matter of fact. Not only that, but they had a great slogan around with it, the king of beers. There's something very regal and majestic about those Clydesdale horses. It wasn't any horse, it was a Clydesdale horse. But what happened to Budweiser? That's the tragedy. What happened was a new category came about called light beer. And it had advantages, right? It was less filling, fewer calories, less filling, but it didn't have the flavor. and it wasn't as kingly as the original Budweiser. But they made the line extension that those brands fought each other instead of launching a new brand. Big mistake. The answer was simple. They should have used a different name for their light beer. The trouble is, now they had two brands using Budweiser. What are you going to advertise and how are you going to advertise it? And they had to kind of drop that visual hammer because light beer was not the king of beers, right? It was maybe the queen, and that's it was certainly not as powerful. Watered down beer. There's nothing very kingly about that. And the lack of reinforcing that visual hammer, the king of beers, led to sales going down dramatically. Of course, the category of regular beer has gone down, and sales of Bud has gone down as well. And Bud Light hasn't really become a strong brand because it's a weak line extension, and over time it's only gotten weaker. Another example, in the United Kingdom, more recently, there was a movement to leave the European Union. And they called it, had a great name and a great visual, Brexit, short for Britain exit. I mean, this was a movement. I mean, we're far from Britain, and so are you, but I'm sure you're very familiar with Brexit. Everybody was. And you had one side with a powerful slogan, a powerful visual hammer, Brexit. And you had another side that wanted to stay in the union. And maybe that was a better idea, as a matter of fact. But they had no visual, they had no slogan, and our missed opportunity. And actually, too bad they didn't come to us, because we had a great visual for them. A great, competitor to Brexit would have been fix it. Let's fix what's going wrong with the European Union. Let's remain strong as a united European Union against the world. But they needed marketing. They needed some kind of slogan to rally behind. And that's really what brands are about. You want to rally behind the idea, whether it's selling computers direct or an energy drink or disappearing photos. I mean, all of these ideas are something, you get passionate about and rallying behind. And there's nothing better than rallying behind a visual. If you can find a visual hammer to become the flag for your brand, and using one of these techniques is a great, great way to get started. And interesting to note, as business goes global, visuals are only going to become more important. I mean, they're important today, but as like we talked with KFC in China, all they have to do, they don't have to translate, right? They just have to show the Colonel Sanders, and people know what the brand is. The 12 most popular languages only reach 30% of the world's population. There are a lot of other languages that reach the other 70%. It would take more than 6,000, many of which are in India, right? You have a lot of languages.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one powerful visual hammer really helps. I mean, that will reach 100% of the world population. Everyone can understand a visual. And that's why we think that visual hammers long term are going to dominate the future. Now, one last thing I'll leave you with, because after writing the book Visual Hammer, we said, wait a minute, there's one more category of visuals that we left out. And that is using numbers as a visual hammer, because numbers are visuals, right? Instead of words. And you think about the sign speed limit 65 versus speed limit 65. Those are understood in very different ways, aren't they? Yeah. And one is much more emotional and also more effective. Because you think a person traveling at 65 miles an hour, they understand the one sign with the numbers instantly, but the vehicle will move 29 feet in the time it takes to read the word. That's the time, a quarter of a second to take to read a word. And so brands that have included numbers within them have become really very effective visual hammers and make these brands more memorable. So, that's another, trick we add to, to our bag, if you will, that if there's an opportunity for a brand to use a number in a meaningful way, it is very, very helpful. Chanel number 5, the world's most famous perfume. 7-Eleven, the world's largest convenience store. Originally, because they were open from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Now most are 24 hours, but it doesn't matter. It's a very memorable brand name. The Ford F-150, it's America's largest truck brand, also a very memorable brand around the world. WD-40, the world's largest household lubricant. So you got a squeaky door or squeaky anything, WD-40. Adding that number just makes it memorable. Porsche 911, the world's most famous sports car. Four Seasons, the largest luxury hotel brand. This is a great brand, 7-Up. And 7-Up was the largest selling lemon lime soda. They pioneered lemon lime. And if you don't remember, but if you ever read about the marketing of it, they were the Uncola. So they went against Coca-Cola. 7-Up was lighter, refreshing, but also had no caffeine. And so they were the opposite. If you don't want Coke, you would want 7-Up. And they built a very powerful brand. But you might say, wait a minute, nobody drinks 7-Up today. Today, the big lemon lime brand is Sprite. Sprite is the biggest selling lemon lime brand today, but not because it is a better brand, not because it has a visual hammer. It's because Coca-Cola owned it. And Coca-Cola, in our opinion, unfairly used their advantage and muscle in the market. You see, Coca-Cola forced their bottlers to choose between 7-Up and Sprite. They said, hey, you want to continue selling Coke? You've got to switch from 7-Up to our lemon lime drink. And as a result, those bottlers didn't want to lose Coca-Cola, which was their biggest moneymaker, and they started selling and marketing Sprite. It's a tragedy. I mean, they should have gone to court over that, as a matter of fact. But it just shows you that the 7-Up. People think, well, Sprite was a better name. It wasn't. It was just unfairly marketed in reality. 5-Hour Energy drink has become a good competitor to Red Bull. It's an energy shot, right? You don't have to drink a big can. It's just a couple ounces in a tiny shot to give you 5 hours of energy. The energy drink brand. And one last example is a company, one of our clients, as a matter of fact, and they were an eye surgery clinic for improving your vision. They initially focused on LASIK surgery, was for younger people, but then they pioneered a surgery for older people and older people in their 40s. And what happens is at the age of around 43, everybody needs glasses. So, you've got glasses now because, the way you were born with your eyes, and you're probably a great candidate possibly for LASIK. And that could, help your, once your eyes stabilize around 25, then LASIK is a great, great surgery. And that you would be a great candidate for potentially. But me, I never wore glasses until age 43 when I suddenly had to wear glasses. And so they had a new surgery to fix that. And initially, they were focused on LASIK, clear sight center. And we developed, they wanted to promote LASIX, but we said, how about a second brand for this new type of surgery for people like me to correct, the need for reading glasses after 43. And so we said, how about a new brand? And we focused on the number 43, Vision 43, glasses free after 43. And so connecting, the idea with the number, in this case, obviously the number that was, very much identifiable. And well, wasn't that well known, but it can be used very effectively in PR, for example, to say, hey, at 43, now it's not 43 for everyone, but it was also a matter of picking a number that sounded nice. And the other part about finding and launching a new brand now, and I think, you're in this position, getting the URL. So, if we called it, middle-aged vision or something very generic, you could never find that URL. As getting sunroof.com is impossible. But adding a name, adding a number to the name, in many cases, there's a lot more opportunities to get the URL. And actually, we thought about 43 Vision or Vision 43, using those numbers made finding that URL, and they were instantly able to get that URL, which was fantastic. Now, you might not know this, but numbers originated in India in the 6th or 7th century and then spread to the rest of the world. Numbers are terrific. There's currently 1.9 billion websites. So finding a new website name can be very difficult. But, in many cases, if there's an opportunity to use a number, that's not a bad strategy to help you, not just with your brand, but also to get that URL. It can simplify that process. Mm-hmm. So that's it. That's the whole presentation on visual hammers and different ways you can think about it for your brand. So I think this really sets you up for next time. So I'm going to look forward to hearing your feedback on what you think. So much, these different, and again, I think, think about, first of all, the name is the last thing you want to think about, whether this, sunroof is the right name or you have other names. What is the strategy? How can we name this category is really important. And then, if there are any competitors, understanding who those are, and then, what kind of visuals can we use within this? And I think we will have a terrific discussion with many ideas. I look forward to hearing what you come up with and to giving you some tips and suggestions, and we'll talk through it then.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Laura. This was
okay.
I had two questions, one
sure.
and one statement, but I think I can put those two questions in the mail because we're already overboard on time. That one statement is that understanding this is so simple, but me and my father always talk about this. All these branding principles, right? They're right in front of us. They're so simple, but it takes some amount of intelligence to know the importance and how much powerful these principles are. So
yes, no, if that is the key. You put your finger right on it. We talk about, you talk about the 22 immutable laws. All right. And they're so simple, but applying them, knowing which law to apply, and applying it is the challenge. I mean, it's so easy to say, yes, a visual would definitely make my brand better, but my goodness, what visual can we find? But once you find it, and once you dig in there, I think you think about for Wipro or some of these others, like there's just cases where it's an additive or it's right there within the brand or within the name, and also you kind of juggle them all at once. One other example to think about is for example BMW. They were going against Mercedes-Benz, and we talked about the ultimate driving machine. But the original strategy was that, that BMW was more of a performance vehicle. And that, was really the original concept But the problem with that is, how do you visualize performance?
Mm.
That is a more correct and technical term if you're talking to a car person,
Yeah.
but it is impossible to visualize. So what they did is they changed the word to driving, not because it's better, but because it was more easy to visualize. So
Right.
that's the challenge. I mean, sometimes you think about, okay, we'll narrow it down to something, but we might have to make some tweaks just so it can be visualized,
Mm.
and some simplifications so that it can be. So yeah, to your point, these things are so simple, but luckily, actually, they are difficult to put into, because otherwise, if everyone did it, that would be terrible. But you're going to be a great advantage because you have the principles. We're going to apply the principles of positioning and focus, and the category and visual hammer to your brand, to enable it to be one of these great next success stories.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for the belief. And
Yes, absolutely. Let me before we go, just to confirm. So I think we'll just plan to meet in 2 weeks on the September 6th.
September 6th. Sounds good. I'm actually
Is that
leaving
good?
the US. The show I was telling you about in Cleveland, Ohio, the
Oh,
Fit
yes.
Marketing conference. So I'll be there on the 11th. So I think we're gonna have a gap after our session on 6th, because I'm in the US for about
Oh,
1.
yeah, sure.
Yeah. And
No problem.
one small request, Laura, is that I want a little bit of clarity on the structure of these sessions, because it helps me learn better. So if I know that what we're going to learn in the coming sessions, I can prepare for the sessions, and I think it can really increase the effectiveness of each session. So, and that preparation could actually be from nothing but your own books.
Oh,
So,
yeah, sure. I understand. Yeah. So I think sure. Well, we can talk on email more.
yeah.
I wanted to kind of get a feeling. I think it would most help for the next session to be that kind of working session between us of sharing and really delving into your own concept and company. So if you come, and you can even share ahead of time, any notes that you might prepare, and then I can kind of structure what we'll talk about ahead of time. And then I think I don't want to plan too far in advance, because I think we'll want to see where we get to the next
Okay,
time, and
understandable.
then we can work out what we want to cover on the following.
Perfect. That makes
Okay,
sense.
because I think we might want to delve more into category, because I think category is incredibly important.
Yeah.
You're building a new category, so we can delve into that. But I think my feeling is for the later sessions now, that we do more of an interactive, and instead of, I mean, I'd be happy to do more presentation type stuff, but I also think it'd be beneficial for you to see how the thought process works and actually applying them to your given situation.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for the
All
clarity.
right.
Yes.
Yes, no, absolutely. And like and that said, totally flexible. I think we just take it, one step at a time, and just make it the most of each session.
Yes. Thank you. See you
Okay.
in 2
All
weeks.
right. Thank you
Bye-bye.
so much. Absolutely. Yes. Thank you.